I suppose, you know, the context of this meeting was to review the October incident, if we call it that, and now we're in the middle of a November incident. So I think to follow on from the Chair's question, I would like Irish Water, the Department and indeed Fingal to maybe give a clearer view as to what the estimated time should there be. Is there 2 tests needed or 3 tests needed with the current water supply before we get the all clear from the HSE? When can consumers, over 615,000 of them, actually expect to have clean drinking water again? And I think that's the fundamental question that those watching in here want to know. So that's the first bit. The second bit is, how do we try to ensure that we don't have incidents like this again as best as possible? Okay, anyone seeking 100% assurance, we're not going to get it. But I think really the thing is firstly to go back to the October incident was different. We know that. But what I do want, sorry, before I move on to that, I do want to ask this one thing. It's been a question that's been raised, obviously, in my own area, Dublin, Fingal. The whole area is affected. Okay, so yesterday evening, people are very angry about this. They're very concerned. And because of what the October incident, which appears to me to be a monumental failure in process, has now created a real difficulty with people in relation to confidence about the robustness of and safety of our water supply, and we don't want that to be the case. So we need to find out is what we're going to do now and how quickly. And I welcome aspects of the statements that have been made here, particularly from Irish Water and from Fingal, about things that have been done very quickly. But one very striking thing when you look at the EPA report was when the incident began at 1500 hours on Monday the 21st of October. So I want to go back to that. And it ended at 5 a.m. on Tuesday the 22nd. And in that period of time, there were 2 specific alarms that showed up in the control room in leak slip. One at 1816, one at 1907. And then after that, when they weren't responded to, and so contaminated water still going into the system, that a text message effectively was sent to the operator there, according to the EPA's own report that's here. And that was ignored. Now, I think that is, for anyone reading the report or watching in, that's just absolutely inexcusable. And what I want to try to get a picture of is how many other times have alarms been ignored. I'm sure you know when they've been ignored. I know of a couple of incidents in the past in my own area. I won't go into specifics here, it's unfair to do that, but how many other incidents and what happens when alarms are actually ignored? One thing, Mr Gleeson, in your statement on page 6, and I'd like you to expand on this, and is that you say Irish Water is in the process of bringing all critical alarms nationally into the National Operations Management Centre. I welcome the fact that the Chief Executive Fingal has also said that Fingal want that to happen without delay. For this to be beneficial, however, Irish Water need to be able to contact plant operators directly when an alarm is triggered. So are you telling me right now that if an alarm is triggered, be it in Ballymore Eustace or in Leak Slip or in Galway or wherever, in all our plants across the country, that you can't contact them directly? And what happens at this? Like, this to me is obviously the weakest link in the chain, that when we know an alarm has been triggered where public safety could be at risk because of contaminated water, and thankfully both of the shutdowns have been precautionary. So I do want to comment as well in relation to trying to assure people about their own public safety with regard to the water supply. So what's the situation right now? If this were to happen again tomorrow, an alarm goes off and it's not responded, and you're not in the National Control Centre, what happens? Okay, and then I'd also, Ms Farley, I'm sorry it's your first time to the committee as Chief Executive, and to congratulate you on your appointment. But these are very, very serious issues, and I'm sure you're aware of that. And it speaks very clearly to an absolute breakdown in process and in procedure as well, from what I can read, and I can only go from what the EPA's report is and to trust what they are saying. So I suppose people want to get this fixed. That's the first thing, looking at what happened. But then finally is what steps are going to be taken between now and then. You've mentioned the UV filter bed, or sorry, the filter bed replacement. That's gone to Q2 2020. And I'd like you to talk on the UV treatment, which was a recommendation. It was actually indeed in March. Additional technologies were looked for in March, and specifically in October, it was UV treatment that was looked for. What does that actually entail? Like, in real terms, the type of capital investment, the length of time that needs to be put in place. And then to conclude, getting back to our current crisis right now, is to try to really get a handle on the communications with regard to when you think in estimate terms that water will be back, because particularly for the infirm, the sick, the elderly, it's a big issue for people. It's a very, very big issue. And some people don't seem to get it like that. I'm glad from but I'll leave it at that. I'm conscious of time and I'll come back in with other questions.
Much obliged. Thank you very much, Deputy O'Brien. Now I might go to Mr. Gleeson first.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions there, right? I guess the one I'll take is maybe how do we avoid this in the future? I think ourselves and Fingal have to look at the ways of working. We've listed a number of actions there, but certainly the direct control and our ability to directly communicate with staff is not in the current way of working. And it's subject to the WRC, so I'm limited to the WRC process, but I think we need to maybe in certain areas look at improving ways of working under the current SLAs.
In plain English, what I'm asking is, like, I know the WRC is there, but what happens right now? Like you're saying, the way of working and not being able to talk to people. So what happens right now? What happens with Irish Water and Fingal when this happens? Well,
it would be escalated by a Fingal operator to their manager, who would then contact an Irish Water manager, who would take actions.
Yeah. And obviously that's far from ideal.
It's not the most efficient. No.
Yeah.
That's fairly
Fingal.
I suppose firstly to indicate that the period of poor water quality was shorter than the gap that's been mentioned as discussed at the committee in terms of the 3 p.m. commencement of the debris accumulation, and the water quality had deteriorated by 6:15 and reached a critical level at 10 to 8 that evening, and it was in fact identified then at 9 o'clock. But that said, there was a failure in the monitoring system on that day, and that is subject to investigation, and that does include a disciplinary process that's underway. Okay. What I can do in reaction to that is to strengthen the systems that are there, and that strengthening has already happened, and that's evidenced, I suppose, in terms of the prompt reaction that was taken on Sunday to this current incident. So that includes a level of automation. It includes, so alerts are sent automatically to the on-call duty manager, for example. It also includes increased requirements from the on-call duty manager in terms of what I want to introduce is increased site visits out of hours, but also to ensure that the system, the SCADA system, which is the system that helps us identify the problem from the 21st. It can be monitored remotely, it can be monitored on site. So increased monitoring of review of that system to understand that it's working well, or if there's a problem that we can address it. So it's not just a reliance on alarms, it's that plus regular auditing and review of what the reports are telling us. So all of that is underway in terms of bringing in those improvements, and that will help prevent this type of incident happening again. And obviously the overriding shutdown of the system, which is now in place, would have prevented the incident in any event. So there's been a lot of improvements introduced in the last 2 weeks. There's some ongoing in the next couple of days, but it will prevent this type of incident. The current incident that's ongoing is very different, as the committee has recognised, and that relates to the quality of the raw water. As I understand it, we would be hopeful that the treatment will return to normal later this evening, provided that there's no further deterioration in the raw water supply. That then instigates the process which was outlined by the EPA earlier and leaves them in a position to commence their audit. So there are a number of steps to go through once the water returns to normal, and we wouldn't be in a position to give a precise timeline for the next day or so.
There's no estimate at the minute, though, Mr. Gleeson. I know you said a number of days earlier on today. Still looking at a number of days, so potentially the end of the weekend.
Well, we took 3 samples last time, so I suspect we'll be looking at something similar this time. And as Anne-Marie says, the plant is still not operating properly, so the window for the slug of water to flush through the system hasn't started yet. This is very unfortunate, and we're not happy about it. But I have to be realistic about the situation. And just to finally on the point, I would be fairly hands-on managing director, and often where I would have a problem plant would go along in the middle of the night, talk to the operators, understand what's happening and that kind of stuff. Under the current working arrangements, I can't do that. I can't visit that site without an invitation and without permission. So to me, that just doesn't seem realistic. Michael would give us a response on the UV, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Deputy, on the UV, obviously as part of the EPA recommendations, and I'd cite two of the recommendations. One is carrying out a full risk assessment of the plant, and then the other relates specifically to the UV treatment. Within the 30-day period that we have to respond to the audit, we will carry out an assessment and we will discuss with the EPA the merits or not of having UV. Obviously, the Leixlip plant, because of its location, as has been alluded to earlier, downstream, like it's at the bottom of the catchment, UV is probably a requirement, but we need to carry out the assessment. It is a major investment, and so we need to be absolutely 100% sure that it is required. So that assessment will be carried out. In terms of the level of the investment itself, you're looking at tens of millions. And considerable OPEX operations cost as well then because of the power demands of the UV system. When the assessment is complete, the nature of installing UV, again, as was alluded to when the EPA were speaking, like on a plant the size of Leixlip, where you have 180, 190 megalitres of water leaving the plant per day, we will require planning permission and we will then have to go through a procurement process. So I'd say best case scenario is probably 2 to 3 years at this point in time. But I would like to mention as well, though, with the UV, even if we had UV in place yesterday, we'd still be in the current situation of a boil water notice, because the pre-treatment, such as the sedimentation tanks and the filtration, has to be working properly for the UV to be effective. So if you like, the UV is the final belt and braces on the treatment for the cryptosporidium.